welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Debunking the Missionaries with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Welcome back, sir. It's always a pleasure, and welcome back, everybody. Very good.
I was learning something, so.
That's all right. That's good. That's good. My thought is, once you stop learning, you probably stopped breathing as well. Very good. So welcome back. So we're going to do a quick touchdown on, or going back to reflect on the last 2 weeks. Sorry?
I just want to do a quick.
Yeah, that was part of my introduction. So he's going to go back and review the past two shows a little bit, so we can kind of get caught up and kind of refresh ourselves on where we're at in this study. And then you're going to be going right on into is the New Testament really history? Which we really love this topic, by the way.
Well, actually, last time was also Matthew 1, 22 and 23, where it talks about the virgin birth, bringing Isaiah 7:14.
Okay.
So I'm going to go very quick through some of the points we made, and then go on because I don't want to get stuck here.
Sure.
But online there was a lot of discussion about it. I know it's a very important thing. In all the lists of 666 prophecies of Jesus, Isaiah 7:14 is one of those brought.
You said 666 prophecies? That's a new one. That's funny.
Well, the number 666 is very important.
Right. Very good. Welcome, Andrea and Jacqueline. Hello.
Okay, I just said hello so people can see.
Okay, very good. Okay. All right, passing the buck. Here you go. Take it away.
Let me go very quickly. Of course, as we know, the issue of Isaiah 53, if we look in the Tanakh in the Book of Kings and see, we can see what's going on, Isaiah 7:15, is that the king and the whole house of David were being threatened by two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Damascus. And what they were being threatened with is absolute destruction. Okay, and that's what the simple meaning is about. Achaz is being told that, Achaz and everybody around there is being told that, listen, I know what's going on here, but it's not what can happen, that there's going to be a child born, and when this child gets to be a certain age, they will already be gone. These people who are bothering you now that you're worried about, you're not going to have to worry about them anymore. In fact, these kingdoms are destroyed. As I mentioned the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles, which talks about it. Objections to that, I'll just go through some very quickly. One was dual prophecy. We discussed the issue. There's no such thing as dual prophecy in the Tanakh at all. We never see such a thing. Prophecy only has one fulfillment, and one fulfillment is quite specific. Another question was brought up about, well, actually, no, there was a prophecy for... Achaz didn't want the prophecy, so the prophecy was actually for the house of David. And as I pointed out, there's really no difference between the two. What would have happened is basically, if they lost the war, that anybody who was related to the royal family would be destroyed and killed, as happened for the king Achaz in the northern kingdom of Israel. When his house was deposed, it meant that everybody would be wiped out. And as we see in 7, I think it's verse 7, we see that they were going to actually put another king in his place, which means the whole royal family would be wiped out. So even if you want to say it was just spoken to the house of David, not just to him, it wouldn't mean any difference. Same problem exists for anybody who is in any way whatsoever related to Achaz. Okay, next thing is that the question is, well, it says there's going to be a sign. Sign has to be something that is miraculous, and we pointed out that in the Torah, Tanakh, that signs are not actually necessary. The signs are signs, something that's going to happen. It's not necessarily miraculous. And I pointed out that, among other things, the rainbow to Noah, the commandments that are given to the Jewish people, Tefillin and Shabbos, are another example. And then in Joshua, the book of Joshua, they put up stones as a sign of a miracle that happened in the past. Signs are themselves, in and of themselves, not miraculous events. Signs are signs that something is going to happen. Let's go pretty much. Then we talked about the word Alma. And we went through some of the places. The word Alma is, and anybody who knows Hebrew language knows that Alma is the feminine form of the word Elam, which means a young person. Alma is young male, and Elam is a young youth, a young female. It appears 6 times. One of the cases, some of the cases, the girl happens to have been a virgin. Rebecca's called one. Miriam, we don't know if she was married or not at the time. Psalms, it's talked about. Proverbs 30, it indicates that actually the woman there was not somebody who had not been married. It's possible she was. Song of Songs 1:3 is not quite clear what it is. Seems to be young women. Rashi does make a comment that it's talking about women who are not married yet. However, Song of Songs 6:8 is talking about women with whom Solomon had sexual relations with, and he mentions the legal categories that we know, in fact, in the Torah and the Tanakh. They are wives, concubines, and then just regular women. Like, for example, Abraham had Hagar, who was a slave. She was neither a wife nor a concubine, but he had marital relations with her. Couldn't say marital relations, but we have to say, sexual relations with her. So that's what's talking about 6:8. So here we see clearly a case where the word alma does not mean that. We pointed out again that the Aramaic, which is pretty much the closest language that we know of to Hebrew, actually uses the word alma, meaning alma has a word, a cognate for alma is called almata, which means a young girl, and the word for a virgin is batulta, just like batula in that. Okay. Finally, 2 other points I made with regards to it. I'm trying to go through very quickly. However, anybody who wants to can listen. There were the last 2 talks that I gave where I went into and discussed these things in more in depth, but and you can even look up the verses I give there. Now, whenever there is a legal need to designate a woman as someone who has not had sexual relations with anybody else, meaning a batula, a virgin, when it was necessary, the word user is always batula, never alma. So we see that, for example, in the case of a high priest who has to marry a woman who was actually a virgin, never having had intercourse with anybody else, he uses the word batula. Same thing when it talks about marriage in Deuteronomy, when it talks about somebody marrying somebody and expecting that she should be a woman who's never had sexual relations, they use the word batula there. And in fact, in Deuteronomy 22:20, we actually learn the reason why the word batula is reversed to a virgin is because anatomically, batulim, which is a plural form, refers to the woman's hymen, which is what gets broken in the first relation. Besides that, let me just one more thing about that. The word Parthenos is mentioned sometime in the Greek version. Now, it has to be understood that the Greek version that we have is not written by the rabbis. The rabbis only translated the first 5 books. There were many Greek translations around at the time, as we know. Greek translations were used many times by Jews who did not live in Israel itself, where the language there was Greek, as opposed to being Aramaic, which is close enough to Hebrew that they would be able to do the 2 languages. Greek is not very close to Hebrew. So, like, for example, Paul lived in Tarsus, which would be a Greek city. We talked about Philo. Philo lived in Alexandria, which is also a Greek city. They used primarily Greek translations that they had. They weren't as fluent in Hebrew as they would have been with the Greek translation. That's what that was for. So the translation of the book of Isaiah was not done by the rabbis. In fact, if you get to the Septuagint that I have, talks about the translation quality. They say the translation quality for that is not very good. And in any case, the problem, of course, is that the word Parthenos appears to have changed its meaning over time. So we find in Genesis 34:3, when it is talking about Dinah after she is married, after she has had relations, she was raped, she is still referred to as a Parthenos. So that's basically it. There are a couple other small points that I made there. They are not as important, although obviously, if you want to go over this, if you haven't listened to it, I strongly, highly recommend that you do listen to those that we had before. And so let's move on. we're still moving further and further. I don't know where Federow says the Greek was equal to the Hebrew, but he used Greek in his discussions, and his work is very, very. There's a lot of stuff that we would, as time goes on, you see, I do refer to Federow many times. Federow was clearly somebody who was from a Pharisaic background. Okay, so let's go into the next one here that we're going to toss in the New Testament and discuss it from the point of, is it historical? Okay, now we get to Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2. Now here we see the story that the wise men come from the east to Jerusalem, and they were asking where about the child of the Messiah was supposed to be born. So we read in verse 3, and we'll read a few verses here. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him, and calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Now, it is worthwhile, I think, if we just look at the actual verse there in the Tanakh. Now, for us, in the Hebrew version, it's Micah 5:1. For the Christian version, they Micah 5:2. It's not really of much relevant. The chapters were never there in the beginning, and they're more basically to sort of help divide it when you're reading it into readable areas. So let's go to chapter 5, and we'll begin to the beginning. You, Bethlehem from Ephraim, that you are small to be counted among the thousands of Judah. From you will come out someone who is going to be a ruler among the Jewish people. And his going out was from long ago, from ancient days. Okay. Now there's a few things that they have here translating it slightly different. Some translate Me'olam meaning from eternity. We're going to discuss about that in a minute. Okay, but that's really what the verse says here. Now, so the claim from here is that the Messiah was supposed to be born in the city of Bethlehem. The biggest problem, of course, is that the verse doesn't say that. Again, what the verse says in Hebrew, and we have to understand something. Whenever we're trying to interpret the Bible, what the Bible actually says, we need to go back to the original, what the original language is. So when it talks about here, it uses two words with the same root. So it says, referring to Bethlehem, Mimchuli Yaitzai, from you will be to me someone who goes out, going out. Yaitzai means to go out. Yes, Moshe will be Yisuo, who will be ruler, and Matzuosav, and his going out of Mekedem, or from Mekedem Yogan, from a long time ago. Now, in both cases, they use the word Yaitzai, means to go out. To go out does not mean to be born, and we can look at a few instances of it where it's used. What it means is literally the same thing in what you say in English. Going out means going from one place to another. Okay. Interesting question, which is not in the guide to what we're doing now, but if we have time, I'll get to it. Okay. So let's look where the word Yaitse is used. The first one I want to look at is actually with the birth of with Yaakov, with Jacob. This is Genesis 28:10. And here's what it says: V'yaytze Yaakov miber Sheva v'yaylech Harun. Yaakov went out from Beersheba, and he went to Haran. Again, v'yaytze, he went out, meaning when you talk about he was in one place and he changed from going to the other place. This is basically what it's the same in English. It's the same thing, but you have to understand. He was in Beersheba, and he is now going towards Haran. He's moving from one place. He went out from one thing to another. That's what he went out from. And that's what Micah is saying, that at some time, the Messiah went out from the city of Bethlehem. What does it mean going out? Doesn't necessarily mean he went out on himself, but what his going or coming out. Now, it is a case, we do find it in rare instances where the word Yaitse, or a form of the word Yaitse, is used in birth stories. And we should need to look at that. Because again, it fortifies what we've been talking about here. So let's look at verse Genesis 25 to 26. (25 to 26). The Yaitse Harishon, this is talking about the twins that are born to Rebecca. The Yaitse Harishon Admoni, Ki lo ke'edus. The first one came out totally red. It's talking about the birth of Isaac. Ki lo ke'edus, very hairy. V'yikishma Isaac, and they call his name Isaac. Okay, 26. V'yachrei Kain Yutzu Uchev, his brother came out. V'Yehuda Achezes B'Aikav, and his hands was held onto his ankle. Bike of Isaac, the ankle of Aikav. V'yikishma Yaakov, and calls him Yaakov. In both cases where the Yaitse is used here, doesn't mean birth. It means it's describing the physical act of a child coming out of the mother. Now we refer to this going birth, but the words used to say nothing. She's not. It doesn't mean you might want to translate as giving birth, but the word actually in Hebrew means went out. The child was in the mother and it went out. That's what it's using. When we want to say something is born, we do the Yelud. Yelud, Noilud, one of that form. And when we want to refer to a birthplace, to give the importance of not that somebody came out from somewhere. So the Messiah doesn't mean he lived there and he came out. He came out from that place. His coming out is from that place. I mean, his source was from that. If you want to talk about somebody who had a birthplace, we see the word for birthplace appearing with Abraham in Genesis 12:1. Genesis 12:1, and let me read what it says. Hashem said to Avram, that's before his name was changed to Avram, Lechecho, go out, Ma'artzecho, from your land, in Moladetcho, from the place in which you were born, in Mabai Zavicha, from your father's house. So Moladetcho here, you could see, if you see, look at the Hebrew, you can see is from the same root as Yahweh, and it means birthplace. You should leave your birthplace, meaning that Abraham was in fact born there. Okay? It's telling him that you go to the place where he was born. From the place where he was born. Then it uses that word. So if in Micah it had used a word in the form of Yelid to indicate the birth, then there would be an argument that, yeah, okay, it's talking about the Messiah being born there. But that's not what it says. V'yaytze means coming out from there. So it doesn't say that he was born there. It just says that the Messiah somehow came out of there, and that's quite true. In Isaiah 11, it refers to the Messiah as Shoresh Yishai. Yishai actually lived in Bethlehem. Now David did not. David lived somewhere else. Now these things are pretty well known. I would like to bring sources that verify what I'm saying here. This is a work written, Christian Evidences for the Jewish People. It's a very interesting book on polemics. I have a lot of books on polemics, trying to answer. This specifically was written to answer a book called Faith Strengthened from Isaac Troki. So he goes what Isaac Troki says. So in this particular thing, he's discussing about that the Messiah's birthplace was not supposed to be Bethlehem. Let me read it in paragraph 238. It's on page 186. Rabbi Isaac will have none of it. He affirms that the prophet refers to Bethlehem not as the birthplace of Messiah, but as the birthplace of David, the home of the family to which the Messiah was to belong. And he says, there is much to be said in favor of the rabbi's contention. It is quite possible that this, rather than the other, was the meaning of the prophet Micah himself. So although he's going to argue against it, he says here that clearly there's a lot to be said about it. We're not talking about something brought off the wall. This is an argument that's pretty known. And so forth. Let's deal with Dr. Michael Brown in volume 3. I think I found it. Yep, that's right. After discussing various translations of it, okay, he's talking about a little bit later. Let me discuss this issue, and then I'll go back to him. Again, he's talking about how do we know which version is it? Does it mean he was born there, or does it mean that he came out from there? So let me go into the next issue, and then I'll go back to Dr. Brown. Now, the next issue here is very simple. In the translation, they say that many Christian translate from the days of eternity, but that's not really what it's translated. We in fact see in Micah 7:14 the same language being used, different translation. Now I read the Hebrew, and then we will see what it says there. So this is Micah 7:14. Okay, here it's talking about you should shiftecho with us, shiftecho with your staff, the sheep of your inheritance, let them dwell in isolation. You are like in the forest, and they should like graze in fields, bushim of God, in the city of Bashan of God, kimai olam, same language, kimai olam, as in the days of old, in ancient times. Same kind of word here, same means in ancient times. It doesn't mean eternity. It's basically saying, like you'd start a fairy tale. You say, long time ago there was such and such. So it's saying that a long time ago, this is when he came out. And now we can see Dr. Brown, because Dr. Brown actually talks about this specific issue right here. And here's what he says. Which translation is right? We think of this. It comes down to the rendering of the Hebrew phrase describing the nature of Messiah's origin. Mekedem mimemai olam. The first word simply means from of old, and is used elsewhere to refer back to God's promises to the patriarchs, which he said in the days of Kedem beforehand, rendered in King David from the days of old. The next two words, however, would most naturally be transferred from eternity, unless context indicated a translation from ancient days. But as we saw before, Kimai olam means from, in Micah, it means from ancient times. And he tries to make arguments here about that. Okay, so anyways, the verse here is clearly not indicating what is told. And so the verse here is not talking about the birth of Messiah, just talking about where he came from. And in fact, we know that to be the case. We're going to be dealing with this issue later once we go investigating some of the claims made in the book of Luke. But we'll leave that for the book of Luke. The next question that raises doubt as to historicity of the New Testament is we need to look at Matthew 2, verse 2 and verse 9. So let me read verse 2 and verse 9. Verse 2, the wise men said, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and come to pay him homage." I'm getting some feedback here. William. Okay, it's better now. Don't like talking to myself. Oh, I'm still getting feedback. For we observed his star at its rising and come to pay homage. So the star is supposed to be there. And in verse 9, when they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of him. I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Okay, I don't have any microphones on. Everything that's coming, it may be coming through your room speaker.
No, it's even your sound.
Well, I haven't changed anything since we started, so if it just started, it has to be on. It can't be on my end because I haven't changed anything.
Okay, let me try here.
Okay.
Okay, let's try again. I took out my speakers. Let me increase the sound. Okay. See, that's what it is. Okay, so it says here, for we observed the star at its rising and have come to pay homage. It's talking about the star rising. And 9 makes clear what they're talking. When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where this child was. Now, this is obviously not historically correct because stars do not move like that. There's no such thing as stars. Stars are like flashlights in the sky. I challenge anybody to go out today and see what he sees outside to see as to whether he sees a star there. He won't. Now, let's continue to the next couple ones that we have here, and if we have time, I'll answer a few questions, because next week I want to start on problems with the book of Luke, since I want to just finish with the problems that we see in the book of Matthew right now. Okay, chapter 2, 13, 14. Now, after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." So, the claim here is that there is a prophecy in the Tanakh, one of the prophets, that claims that out of Egypt I call my son. Now, the problem with that is, of course, we need to really look at the verse there. We know that it's Hosea, the prophet, chapter 11. Okay? Now, everybody agrees that the simple reading of that is as talking about where Hashem takes Jewish people out of Egypt. There's no disagreement to that. What we do see is that people talk about a type, they talk about Dr. Brown at some place, I've heard him talk about like it's midrashic type of interpretation or something of that type of nature. The problem is we need to examine, before we look at the verse, we need to examine a second. Okay? Now, we're being told Hosea is talking about God's Son and taking him out, and this, of course, means Jesus, who is the Son of God, as the New Testament tells us. So we need to consider, before we look at the verse like this, what kind of a son is Jesus? Obviously, there's many places where it says that Jesus claims himself that he does with the will of the Father. So we see he's an observant, is a obedient son. He's not a rebellious son. He does what the Father wants. Even when it came to the crucifixion, we see in the garden, it talks about, how he asks God that he should take it from him, but, he's willing to take it, but, So we see the New Testament tries to show us that Jesus wasn't an obedient son. The problem is, let's read what it says actually in Hoshea the prophet. Kinar Yeshua, when Israel was when it was a youth, Vai, and I loved them. Im Mitzrayim kedusi uvni, and from Egypt I called him to my son. Okay, so calls my son out of Egypt. What's the translation here? I've called my son. Okay, called my son of Egypt. Okay, it means basically, although it means to call out, we understand it to mean that it's talking to bring the Jewish people out of there. Or as Matthew's trying to tell us, it's talking about Jesus having been there, being called out by God to go back. Kuri lahem, I called to them. Kind of holchi mepanayim, as I called to him, they went away from my face. The Baalim, to the Baal, which is an idol. Izabaichi. The Baal is Izabaichi, to the Baal they sacrifice, the Pasliyam Yaktirayim, and to their idols they burnt incense. Well, obviously the son here, this is talking about Israel, obviously, it's talking what happened. It's in short giving us an idea what happened, specifically talking about the northern kingdom here, which was how I went to the northern kingdom. Saying specifically like this: I called you out, I showed my love for the Jewish people, but what happened? They went to serve idols. So if this is talking about Jesus, we have to go back and ask the question. Okay? So God calls to Jesus to come out of Egypt. He comes in to the land, but when does he worship idols? The son there worships idols. So I don't understand that. So makes a little bit of a problem here. The verse is obviously not talking about a son who's obedient and good. It's talking about a son who's rebellious and wicked. That's what the whole purpose of Hoshea is. If you read Prophecy 11, you see is that the whole purpose of chapter 11 there is to say how even though Hashem was good for them when they were young, in the beginning of the Jewish people, when they were becoming a Jewish people, which is what happens going out of Egypt, what did they do? They immediately rebelled. Well, how does that port over to Jesus in Matthew? Matthew is taking a verse totally out of context, totally out of meaning in the context of even the verses there, and imposing on something that has nothing to do with it. It's totally out of context, has nothing to do with that. Now, if we look here, 1 second, I believe Luke and Williams makes a discussion about that. Let me see what he says here. In part 2, page 7. Yeah. Okay, let me read what he says about this, because obviously we're talking about, many people that believe that literally Hoshea is talking about Jesus going out of Egypt. So Luke and Williams says this: now it may be granted at once that no Christian scholar of today supposes that Hoshea constantly referred to Christ. Son is evidently the nation of Israel, which is obvious, because the son is someone who God loved and rebelled against him. But I asked, did St. Matthew think that Hoshea referred constantly to Christ? I see no sign that St. Matthew did. Why then did he quote the passage with the prefatory words that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet? The answer to this is of deep importance for understanding not only this passage, but also many other passages in the New Testament. So he goes and says that man does not want to prove anything. Well, this is very interesting because you have to think about it. According to him, and there are many, all of these verses that are brought here, they're not trying to prove anything about Jesus. They're basically wasted paper, wasted words on paper. Why are they there for then? Why are people written in such a way that can confuse and in fact, if we look today, any list of the 666 prophecies of Jesus will always have Hosea 11:1. Will always have Isaiah 7:14. But if you're saying that Jesus, that the writer of Matthew did not mean it literally, then what are we making such a big deal about? Why do you bring to me? Why are you coming to Jewish people and saying, listen, Jesus' life proves that he's a Messiah. Look at how he's born of a virgin. He went out of Egypt. All of these things. Why do you say that? Where does that even make any sense? How could you at one side have to admit that Matthew never intended to say that? Then what's the use of Matthew writing it? Why is he saying it's fulfilled? What is the purpose of that? Who are you trying to fool? Obviously trying to fool people who do not know Tanakh or have been so brainwashed into believing Christianity that they will ignore the simple context of what's there. Now let's go to the next one. The next one we want to do is actually the same type of thing. Let's go to verse 16 through 18. This is the killing of the innocents. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem, who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. So this sort of makes a problem for us because the time frame, he says, is like 2 and younger. So it's not actually, it could be close to or up to 2 years before Herod dies, if this is in the last year. We don't even know what this is in relation to the death of Herod. Herod's death doesn't come in until later. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing on lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children, she refused to be consoled because they are no more. Think about it a second. What it's saying here is that the prophet is talking about the children who are being killed. Okay, I see a couple of questions for you, which hopefully I'll have time for, because they're common questions with simple answers. So let's look at what actually appears in there. Now, the reference is to Jeremiah 31:14. So let's go there. But we want to look at the whole passage, so let's do 14 to 16. I think that should be enough. Maybe I'll do a little bit more. Hashem call beruma nishma. Okay, so Hashem says, a voice is heard in Ramah. Tibeichet rimim. Rachel. The Rachel is crying al benaya on her children. And she has not been comforted from that because they know more. Hashem. Be quiet, from crime. And your eyes from crime. Because it's a reward for you. Because they are going to return from the land of their enemies. What's going on here? Jeremiah is giving a prophecy about going into exile. And the Mama Ruchel, she's crying. They go past, when going into exile, they pass the city of Bethlehem, which is where Rachel is buried. Anybody who's been to Israel knows that the tomb of Rachel is in Bethlehem. They go by here, and Rachel is crying for her children. The grandchildren are going into exile. The kids are children. And what does Hashem say? What is the comforting words? They're going to come back from exile. What is coming back from exile, from the land of the enemies? What does it have to do with kids being murdered? These kids are not coming back. They've been murdered. They'll see the parents in the next world. That's a different story. But they're not coming back. They're not returning to the land. That's what it's about. Going into exile, but don't worry about it, because even though they're going into exile, Jeremiah remembers the prophet about the exile, talking about how they're going to exile, but always is comforting them, saying, listen, don't worry about it. Even though they're going to exile, they're going to be coming back. What does this have to do? What does this have to do with anything to do with killing any innocent children? What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. But this is brought as a prophecy. Even more, let's continue with there, because there's a problem with this also. We do have historical evidence of Herod. We have a very good history of Herod. That's from Josephus. Josephus writes a lot about the Hashmonean dynasty and about Herod and about what kind of a person he was. I mean, let's put it this way: he's a piece of cake. This guy was, pretty bad, nasty character. Okay, we got to admit about it. And Josephus loved writing about all the kinds of things he did. I mean, this guy was a pretty, but you could scour through Josephus, you won't find anything like that, where he murdered a whole city's kids. And that would have been one of the worst things he did. I mean, he did a lot of things. He killed his own children because of things, and whatever. But killing all the children in a city, that's something could not have been avoided by Josephus, because that would have been among the big ones that Herod, certainly among the top 5. But it doesn't appear there. Why? Because it never happened. We don't know any kind of date when it happened. It's supposed to have happened toward the end of his rulership, his kingship. Now we got a lot of stuff from Josephus talks about that, because Herod was really a ruthless type of guy, but not mentioned. Why isn't it mentioned? Because it never happened. Never happened. Not at all. Okay, let's do the last one. We're coming to the end of the birth story here. So that's Matthew 2, verse 23. So it tells us a very interesting thing. Let's start with the story at 19, where they're coming back. And it says, when Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead. Okay, so we find out that Herod died. We have no idea how long this was. If we would know how long it was, meaning how long they had been in Egypt, we might have an idea when Jesus was actually born, whether he was born in 4 BCE or 5 or 6 or, even more. We have no idea, because it doesn't give us any information. And when he heard that Archelaus was ruling of Judea in the place of his father Herod, because that's what happened. When Herod died, his kingdom was split. Archelaus took Judea. Herod, someone who said Herod took the Galilee, and Philip took another area. He was afraid to go there. He was afraid for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't say here. And after being warned in the dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. So he goes to the district of Galilee. Remember, I pointed out to you that in Matthew, it appears he's born there, where in Luke, he actually is born in Nazareth. The city of Joseph. In Matthew here, from this, it's clearly a case that the city of Joseph was Bethlehem, and so he flees to Galilee, whereas in Luke, the city of Joseph is Nazareth, and then he goes to Galilee. Okay, whatever. We discussed it already. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. Now, this one is one of the most interesting controversies there is. First of all, everybody admits there is no messianic prophecy that says explicitly that the Messiah is supposed to be called Nazarene, or if it was from Nazareth, Notzri. Okay, nowhere it says that. So the question is, okay, so where they get it? Well, we have to read it again. If we read this verse again, there's something very important before we go look at the verses that are used to give to it. Let's read what it says again. There he made his home in the town of. Let's divide this into two parts: the A part and the B part. So 23a, it says this: there he made his home in a town called Nazareth. Part B, so that what had been spoken to the prophets might be fulfilled, he would call the Nazarene. So part B says that the prophet said he would call Nazarene. And in this, there are a lot of examples as to what it means. One is because it's a reference to Nazarite. We're going to look at the source of that, and then it's not Torah again. The other is because he was called a Noitzer. Noitzer means a shoot, referring to Isaiah 11. We'll talk about that in a second also. But the problem is, what's with 23a? 23a says, he will do X in order that Y should be fulfilled. That's what the form of the verse is. A to A, 23a, he will do X. 23b, to fulfill what it says in this. So 23a, the first part, is intimately associated with the second part. It's the reason why. It's what causes the fulfillment of the prophecy. It tells you specifically in Matthew, what is causing the fulfillment of this prophecy? The fulfillment of the prophecy is that he goes to live in the city of Nazareth. By the way, in Hebrew, Nazareth couldn't say it. He goes to live in the city of Nazareth. So what's the cause of him fulfilling the prophecy? That he goes to live in the city of Nazareth. Okay, keep this in the back of your mind because we're now going to look at the two things that are given. First one is that I should be a Nazarene, a Nazar. Okay, this appears in the Torah in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. We have all the laws of that in chapter 6. Now, in order to be a Nazar, and we know from Shimshon was a Nazar from birth, so we know what it's supposed to be. There's a lot of things you're supposed to do. So, for example, in verse 6:3, when it talks about a Nazarite oath, what does it say? Miyayin v'shaycha yazir. You should stay away from wine and aged wine. So you're not allowed to have any kind of wine. We clearly see that that's not true. Where do we clearly see that's not true? The Last Supper. Jesus makes a bracha, shows the wine. This is the wine. This is my blood. This is my body. It becomes the source for what's the Eucharist. Always wine. How could you say he was a Nazar? How can he become the Nazarene when he wasn't a Nazarene? The Nazarene, the primary thing for a Nazarene is doesn't drink wine. And Jesus drunk wine. So how could you say that that's what it is? Doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work. Now also, it says all of the days in verse 5, it says all the days he's not supposed to cut his hair. He's supposed to let his hair grow. Now, all the pictures have Jesus with long hair. Looks like a 1960s hippie. But, where's the New Testament say he never cut his hair? New Testament never said he cut his hair. Okay? He's also not allowed to be, if you look at verse 9, he's not allowed to be nearby dead bodies. So how can he raise Lazarus from the dead? He goes to Lazarus and he doesn't raise him from the dead. So we see that, first of all, even on the simplest level, you cannot say that it refers to him being a Nazarite, because in fact, he didn't follow any of the laws. Two of them we know for sure. One is that he didn't stay away from dead bodies, which would be a violation of oath. The other one he drank wine. We see that from the Last Supper. So he knows. So anybody says that, the problem is he wasn't a Nazir. He didn't follow the laws for the Nazir. So how can you say he was supposed to be a Nazirite? Means that because he wasn't. Okay. The second one is more interesting because it is based on a prophecy that's actually messianic. That's Isaiah 11. So let me go there. I have to read the Hebrew so you can see where it's coming from. Okay, chapter 11, verse 1. The Choyte Megeza Yishai, and there will come out somebody from the stump of Jesse, from the Jesse. By the way, this is another support. I didn't bring it here, but I just see it right now. This is another support for understanding Mika the way that I'm talking about, that it means he came out, because it says V'yutza, he comes out. It refers to somebody coming out from somewhere. He's coming out from Jesse. V'naitza v'shiroshav yiflach, and the shoot will sprout from its roots. Okay, so we see that the Mashiach is referred to as a something that sprouts out, Neitzer, and that's close to Netzeret, so it seems, it could be that. It seems similar to that. But the problem is, he's not called, it doesn't say he's going to be called a Neitzer here. It describes what he's going to be. But it doesn't say that that's what he's going to be called. It doesn't say he's going to be called it. He is it. It's not somebody's called. We don't see him called a Neitzer. Yeah. And what's even more important, again, we have to go back again to this main problem that we have there. I mean, according to that definition, if we say that it's referring to Isaiah 11, I mean, Mashiach could have been born in Brooklyn. He could have been born in Russia. The Baba Shadeh was born in Russia. He could have been born in Russia. He could have been born anywhere. There's no specific reason that he has to be born has to live anywhere or born anywhere. He doesn't have to live in Nazareth to be called that, because that transcends any place. It belongs to the person. He could live in Jerusalem his whole life. He could live anywhere he could have lived, and it would also apply to him. So how can you say that's a prophecy? But again, we have to come back again. The verse says clearly, why was he called it? Because he went to the city of Nazareth. The word Nazarene is associated with the word Nazareth. How does Isaiah 11 help you with that? It doesn't tell you anything about that. He doesn't have to go there. He can stay to Bethlehem, where Matthew hasn't born, where Matthew hasn't born, and being in Joseph's, he could stay there. Why does he have to go to Nazareth? Why? Doesn't exist. Okay, we're going to stop here because the next part of this unit will deal with the book of Luke. Because we're going to examine Luke just like we did Matthew.
Okay. Go
through it point by point, showing the many different types of problems that there are in that. Now, there are some questions, and I will definitely deal with them. So the first question.
Go with the first one with the Muhammad coming as in Deuteronomy. Yeah, do that one first if you don't mind.
This is very interesting. First, the Muslims claim that the Torah was corrupted and stuff like that. There are a few problems with that. And I'll do the first one is this. And we can discuss whatever. In Islam, Jesus is a prophet. We know that. We also know that Jesus taught from the Tanakh. So that tells us that the Tanakh, at least the version in his time, was correct, unless you're going to say that Jesus was in error and he didn't know what the actual word of God was. He was teaching something from a false book that was not correct. Okay? Now think about it a second. We actually know what is what was then. Okay. We know that, for example, from the time after destruction, all the texts are Masoretic text form. After the destruction time, we don't have binary. Always Masoretic. You might find some minor errors, like we talked about textual criticism in the New Testament. You'll find that there are copyist errors and stuff like that, but you won't find anything in a different like that. Now we do know in the Dead Sea Scrolls that there is a Greek text which follows the Septuagint, which has minor differences. Some of them are translational issues, but there are like 2 or 3 places where the differences. But none of them affect anything of which there's any kind of disagreement with us and Islam. On the other hand, we do know that, in fact, while the claim is that the Quran now is the same, if you actually go into, there's a lot of scholarly work on that. That's really taking us away from what we're doing here. There's a lot of scholarly work to show that, in fact, the Quran that we have, that Uthman put together, was not the original, but there were changes made to it. We have things like we have verses that appear were on archaeological. They found like on walls and stuff like that, and they disagree with the text that we have now in some places. Whether important or not is really not really important. But if we're going to talk about such a thing like that, the Quran has it also, but I'm not aware of any that are significant. There are some books on that, and I'm not really so much up on that kind of a subject, so I can't talk about it. But as far as it is, that's something that the later Muslims trying to say is that the Torah was corrupted. And that's not really the case. There are errors and things, like in any kind of copyist, but none of these are really significant. There's only 2 places that are significant. One in the book of Jeremiah, and I believe the other book is Samuel, where they have a little bit longer. But the fundamental things that with which we would disagree with Islam are unaffected. Another question was asked by the same person is Deuteronomy 18. First of all, the reason why that can't apply to Muhammad is because Moshe says it's among your brothers, and that would mean that it's talking about prophets that only come from Israel. It's not going to tell a prophet from somewhere else. Okay, and it's not talking about a specific prophet. That's not true. It's talking about any prophet that comes afterwards. But in that particular case, it's talking about a prophet who specifically comes from Israel. Okay. It's not a denial that there won't be prophets from other places. For example, Balaam was a prophet who came from another place even after that. But it is talking about prophets specifically that come from Israel, and that you have to listen to what they say. Okay, let me see what we have here. Do you see any questions here, William? I mean, I can take a quick look and see if what there is.
Okay, I'm scanning it right now to see. Let me see here. Let me switch screens here for a second. Guys, if you're watching, be sure to tag the @Tanakh Talk whenever you do have a question. There we go. Getting feedback in chat. Sounds good. Okay, good deal. Yeah, I don't see any questions other than just that first one.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, that's fair enough. It's pretty much top of the hour anyway.
Some mentioned interesting issues.
Right on. So this would be a good wrap-up point anyway. We're about 2 minutes before the hour, so.
Yeah, no, I can't start the next section here because we'll be in the middle of like a verse or something like that.
Right.
This doesn't make sense, and it's not really fair to you guys.
Very good. All right. Well, that sounds good then.
1 second. I'm almost finished here. They're bringing some information here.
You really don't have time to get into to answering a question anyway, because it's pretty much already an hour. So
I'm just trying to see if there's anything.
All right, good deal. We can always double check and bring them into next week. So, but yeah, so we're back on full schedule. We'll see Rabbi Shulman again, same time, same place next week.
We will continue
7 p.m.
Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to start on the book of Luke.
Excellent.
Luke's virgin birth story, and we're going to examine some of the problems we found from the virgin birth story.
Excellent. That's great. Loving the topics, Rabbi. Loving the topics. Good deal. Okay, folks, thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you same time, same place next week. We also got several shows lined up for tomorrow, so be sure to tune in. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications. When you turn on notifications, be sure to click on the all button, so that way you get all the notifications, okay? So y'all have a great evening, and Shavua Tov, everybody. Take care, everybody.